Hello again everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you about gaming disorder in children and teenagers. My name is Tracy Maxfield. I'm a retired nurse, peer specialist, author, speaker, and a staunch stop bullying and mental health advocate. And so right now, I think most of you are aware that we are in the middle of a crisis. We have the pandemic of the COVID-19 virus, and most children and teenagers, and in fact young adults, are now off school and are actually at home on isolation. I think the challenge during this most difficult time is that we're going to find that many kids are going to turn to social media, not only as a form of social connection and not to feel lonely, but also as a means of connecting with the outside world and finding out what's going on, because A, they don't want to be left out, and two, if they're not allowed to meet up with their friends, then obviously everyone needs to know what's going on and needs to establish a sense of community. Now, there are lots of positives about that, but as parents, I urge you to continue to monitor the social sites, the online chat rooms, the various games, the apps they are downloading, what exactly they're doing on the World Wide Web, because as we know, cyberbullying is actually now increasing even though kids are no longer in school. And also what we may find is that as more and more kids turn to games, not only for stimulation and a sense of excitement and enjoyment, and also a relief from the stress and the boredom of what's going on, but it can be very easily become a habit which can become an addiction. And so I think it's quite timely that I just review exactly what gaming disorder or addiction is. So this addiction is not yet classified in the DSM-5, that's the Diagnostic Manual of Psychiatric Mental Disorders. However, the International Classification of Diseases has recognized gaming disorder as a mental disorder which requires not only psychological intervention but also treatment. And last year in 2019, the World Health Organization went one step further and said that gaming disorder is, quote, a pattern of gaming behavior characterized by impaired control over gaming, an increased priority given to gaming over other interests and priorities, and an increased, continued and escalated gaming behavior despite negative consequences from the behavior. So basically what it means is continued use of gaming without regard to social connections, maybe homework or assignments, personal hygiene, family time, meal times, participating in other important activities. Now, we know that 90% of kids play games, and to be perfectly honest, there are lots of positive benefits from online games. It makes us feel good because it triggers the brain's reward center, which releases dopamine, and dopamine is our feel happy, feel good hormone. Other benefits: it's a great way of expressing and releasing emotions. It's a great way to connect with others, especially those who may be a little tongue-tied or isolated. Talking about games and connecting online in chat rooms about games allows them to express themselves. It improves the concentration and attention span, and that is not only the sustained attention but selective attention span, and this has actually been proven in research. It's a stress relief, we know. It promotes great hand-eye coordination and manual dexterity, and it increases the size and efficiency of areas of the brain involved in visual spatial skills. Now the problems are, and I did actually review this in an earlier YouTube video and blog post, is that we know that our children, our teenagers' brains are still growing and developing, and so this incessant exposure to games can actually alter the brain chemistry of children and teenagers. And what it is that it's the physical and emotional responses that are triggered by playing these games mimic responses in real life. So if they're doing an action or a war game or a horror or a thriller game, it stimulates the fight response. So that means that it increases our heart rate, increases our breathing, increases our blood pressure, also starts pumping adrenaline, which is that fight into the body. Eventually what happens is that it's twofold. Either it keeps that alert trigger on, and as I've mentioned before, it's like the needle on the record player, and so the body is from head to toe flushed constantly with inflammatory neurochemicals, but it also desensitizes the child or the teenager not only to violence and the impact of the violence, but also to the foul language and to the behaviors. So if, for example, a game portrays rape or sexual assault on a woman, that almost normalizes it, and in the brain some kids and teenagers can perceive that as normal and accepted behavior. What we have found is that children, teenagers who have a pre-existing neurological condition such as ADHD or a mental disorder such as depression, OCD, conduct disorder, and even those with high impulsiveness and who have a propensity to self-harm and SSI, non-suicidal self-injury, are more likely to develop a gaming addiction. Now, I think another thing that we need to look at is the more that a child or teenager is online, the more risk of being cyberbullied, of having their identity stolen, of being victimized, and also maybe being introduced to people that may encourage them to engage in criminal or risky behaviors. An example, and I've shared it before, and forgive me for repeating myself again, but the most classic example of the detrimental impact of games on developing brains are two 11-year-old boys who, after watching a game in which a plank of wood was nailed into the head of a person, decided they wanted to see what it would be like to nail it into the head of a young boy with autism. And their response was, because they had seen it, they actually wanted to know what it felt like to them and what it would do to the person. Now, interestingly, it was all adults that was involved in the gaming video, but obviously two 11-year-old boys are not going to really, well, I hope not, nail a plank of wood into the head of an adult, but they chose a more vulnerable child. So again, it shows that they were a little conscious of what they were doing, but the very fact that they wanted to do that is very, very alarming. And of course, I'm showing you the worst case scenarios of what could happen. But going back to gaming disorder, I think gaming disorder does not result in these types of behaviors. It's what actually happens to the child or the teenager who is addicted to the games and the impact it has not only on themselves but on their environment around them, on school, and on their family and their parents. Now, to meet the classification of a gaming disorder, what we need to know is the behavior must have been persistent constantly for a minimum period of at least 12 months. And, sorry, I get some sun in my eyes here. And it must be so severe that parents have noticed the impact. And again, as I've mentioned, environment, parents, schoolwork, and the health and well-being of the person. Now, gaming addiction is not actually defined by the number of hours played, but the question is whether or not it seriously interferes with the child or teenager's daily life. And it's identified really by the following 9 criteria. And what experts are saying is a score of 5 or higher out of 9 usually indicates that there's a very high probability of that child or teenager having a gaming disorder or addiction. So I'm going to actually read the criteria out. The criteria are: number 1, preoccupation with games, and that it becomes the dominant activity in daily life. 2, withdrawal symptoms, tantrums, moods when the games are removed. So we can have anger, sadness, hitting out, acting out, irritability, anxiety. 3, a tolerance, that's spending more and more time gaming and less time on other things, such as eating, personal hygiene, social interaction, homework, sleeping. 4, inability to control or reduce the amount of time gaming without developing an emotional reaction and outburst. 5, loss of interest in family time, social activities, friends, that goes without saying. 6, continued and excessive use of games despite the awareness of the detrimental impact on health and well-being. 7, will deceive others about the amount of time spent gaming. 8, turns to games to escape feelings of guilt, anger, fear, anxiety, hopelessness. And 9, schoolwork suffers. Now, I think what we also need to add is that some of the other harmful impacts is that eventually a child or teenager with a gaming disorder will not attend school and will likely drop out, and so that leads to future consequences. But also they gain weight because they're in a sedentary position. They usually become addicted to high soda or high caffeine drinks. Both of them have a significant impact on health and well-being. They usually go for very long hours without sleep, so they have a disturbed sleeping pattern, and we know this can also promote the development of a mental disorder such as anxiety or depression. So I think what parents need to know is, if you think or you're very concerned that your child or teenager may in fact have a problem with gaming, I think the first thing you want to do is actually keep a record of the symptoms and the habits and the emotions whenever you try and actually pull the child away from the games. Note their sleeping habits. What are they eating? Have they gained weight? Look at all the criteria and actually check off which ones the child or teen exhibits. And then what I would do is I would make an appointment with the physician or the pediatrician to follow up and discuss it. The more information you have at hand, the better the appointment will run, and the better able the pediatrician or the physician will then be to plan the next step. Now, you'll have to excuse me. I've actually been tested for COVID-19, so you don't need to fret. I am negative. What I'm actually experiencing is a spring cold, so I kind of have that froggy in the throat with a little bit of irritation, so I cough every now and again, but I'm fine. So treatment for a gaming disorder is actually tailored to the individual child or teenager's needs, and they have to take into account their mental state, social skills, educational level, learning ability, and the severity of the addiction. The treatment options include therapy with an addictions counsellor, and then there may be family therapy or group therapy. Talk therapy is very helpful, individual therapy. Art therapy as a means of self-expression. Exercise therapy is found to be very helpful because it increases the serotonin level, which elevates the mood, and so they can get that happy buzz feeling without relying on the games to stimulate the dopamine. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, will teach the child or teenager different ways to think, behave, and respond to stressful situations. And then last treatment option, and that this is the more extreme, but either residential rehab or wilderness camp. Now I'm going to briefly mention an episode of Dr. Phil that I saw a couple of months ago, where parents of a 17-year-old boy had contacted him for help because they felt he had a gaming addiction. He was gaming daily, 7 days a week, for up to 17 hours a day. He would finally go to bed at about 4 a.m, sleep for a short period of time, get up, and immediately start gaming. The gaming happened on the sofa in the living room, which served as his dining area, his gaming area, and his sleeping area. This had been going on for well over a year. He had dropped out of school. He had not attended any family function or gatherings. He only would actually get off the sofa to go to the washroom, and he did not attend to his personal hygiene. He would have to be berated by his parents into doing it. They served his food to him, which consisted of fast food, junk food, and sugary foods. So as you can see, the obesity. He has diabetes, and he's not well. Every time a discussion arose about stopping the games, turning the games off, going to take a shower, eating something healthy, going to school, an extreme argument would arise where there was physical violence, a physical altercation, things were thrown, foul language, you name it. It was a teenager having a mega tantrum, but acting out because of the fear and anxiety that the thought of removing himself from the game would do. When he actually came to seek help from Dr. Phil, he admitted he had a problem and acknowledged that he in fact was extremely depressed, and the depression, even though it had gotten worse, gaming the games had actually provided a respite and an escape, and the thought of stopping them would, I think, made him feel like he was going to fall off a cliff, for want of a better word. And I think this is what we need to remember. Anytime we develop an addiction to something, an addiction fills a gap in a person's life, be it a child, teenager, young adult. And it's because they either have difficulty dealing with their feelings, their emotions, their stress, their anxiety, trying to suppress maybe years of childhood abuse, neglect, mistreatment, but there is usually there is a reason for the behavior, and we need to get to the causative factor in able to understand and help the child or teenager move forward. Now, this particular boy actually had to go to a wilderness camp, and the parents had to then go to individual therapy, because what's important to realize is if the child or teenager gets the appropriate help and is able to change the behaviors and assimilate back into the family life, and yet the pre-existing parental behaviors continue, then things are going to go back to where they were before. So that's why I think it's important that it's always a family unit that must deal with a mental illness, a mental disorder, a learning disability, an addiction, gaming disorder. So if your child or teenager is diagnosed with a gaming disorder, or if you fear that maybe they're playing games a little bit too much and you don't want it to become a gaming disorder, this is what you can actually do. Talk about games with them. What kind of games do they like? Why do they like playing them? How did they make them feel? What is it about them that they enjoy? You need to work with a physician, psychiatrist, addictions counselor, therapist with the treatment plan, and you need to introduce it to the family and you need to implement it. So that means if there's any medications given, because maybe there's anxiety or a depression that they are given, you follow through with all the appointments. You need to talk obviously with school, because you need to reintroduce them to school, and you need to work with the school teachers and the counsellors on how best to do that and what they need to monitor for. You need to start scheduling family time and social activities, and keeping busy and doing fun things. You need to schedule an agreed upon time to do chores, to go to bed, to clean his room, for meals, when homework is done, and when gaming can be done. And then you need to monitor the games that your child or teenager is playing. And this goes without saying. You should be monitoring what they're going, what sites they're going on, and chat rooms, etc. on the World Wide Web. Another thing is encourage the physical activity, because we know exercise therapy is actually a part of treatment. And so encourage them to maybe, join a club, or just, play ball with friends or even family. But you need to have that quality time and that distraction and that socialization. Another thing is, obviously, if they've gained weight, you want to work with the nutritionist and develop a weight loss plan, but promote a healthy diet. And I mean lots of good fruits and veggies and glasses of water, and replace all the junk food and fast food stuff. If they're getting treatment for secondary medical conditions such as diabetes, then you obviously need to implement that into the day-to-day routine. I think it's good to try and keep to a structured routine. It promotes safety and continuity, but also it enables the child or teenager to know that they have certain responsibilities that they have to follow through on, and they still will have time gaming. I think it's also agreed upon a time with all the family that at a certain time at night all the devices are turned off and are put in another room, so at least then you're not frequently checking on your kid, that they could be really up on their phone, on their tablet, on their computer, playing games at 3 a.m. in the morning. Talk to other parents. Consider joining a support group, and that could be in person or online. And right now I think everything is best online, given the isolation requirements with COVID-19. And I think also for parents, self-care, because this is really difficult. You don't want to stop your child or teenager from playing games, but you also do not want it to become their whole life. And so lots of what I'm suggesting is kind of preventative measures, so it doesn't become out of hand and you don't have to deal with a child or teenager who has now developed a gaming disorder. And I think the most important point, and I always end every single video and blog post, is be there, listen to your child or teenager, be open, non-judgmental, spend some one-on-one quality time with them, develop that trusting relationship, get to know them so they will confide and open up to you. Be there, and most importantly, show love and express love. Most important things. And so please do check out my website, www.tracymaxfield.com, for the accompanying blog post, which goes into a little bit more detail and also lists the 9 criteria. And please consider subscribing to my YouTube videos so you won't be bombarded with emails and social media messages asking you to check it out. Consider subscribing and pressing the bell, which sends you a reminder every time a video is posted. And right now I am just doing 2 videos a month until the summer, and then I will proceed with 1 video a month throughout the summer, because if you're not already aware, I now have a weekly podcast called Engage, Educate and Empower, which where I interview a guest, and we talk about the issues and the life situations and the world problems that our kids are dealing with on a daily basis. And so we discuss abuse, ACEs, bullying, suicide, mental illness, the influence of social media, adoption and foster care, and how kids actually respond to that, and also mental health awareness and how to promote that in our children and teenagers. So I hope you would consider checking that out. It's on podcast.com, Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Player FM, to name a few. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and you feel that you're a little bit better informed about gaming disorder. Next time, I'll be talking to you about somatoform disorders in children and teenagers. Thank you.